morning, one and all present here. Myself, Dr. Monali Sori, Assistant Professor at BITS Institute of Physiotherapy, would like to welcome everyone in today's webinar. Today's, today's session will describe the anatomy and physiology of peripheral nerve and its relevance to the role of physiotherapy. It will then go on to describe the role in three stages of PNI and its clinical perspective. It's my privilege to introduce my teacher and today's presenter, Dr. Megha Sandeep Se. She is specialized in rehabilitation. She is working as a lecturer at SVB College of Physiotherapy, VS Hospital, Ahmedabad since 18 years. She is Master's and PhD guide at Gujarat University. She has written a book titled Principles and Practice of Physical Rehabilitation, published by the JP Press, and is co-author of a book, Effect of Lifestyle Modification and Exercise on Fatigue in subject with the post-polio syndrome. She has also written a chapter on disability in book on community health. She is having over 100 publications in national and international journals and also presented papers at national conferences and poster at CSP Conference UK in 2014. She has conducted seminars on research, electrotherapy, and clinical decision-making skills, and delivered lectures in state and national conferences. She is member of ethical committee as well. Before starting the session, I would like to tell that we will be have a live question answer session at the end of the topic. At that time, you can ask your doubts in the chat box. To go through the presentation, kindly pin on the account name Monali Sori. If you miss anything, don't worry, we will put this session on our YouTube channel. Before starting the session, now I request all the participants to put the microphone on mute mode, and please don't share your screen to avoid chaos. Now, without wasting much time, I would like to request Mega Ma'am to start the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. At the outset, thank you, Monali, for giving me a chance to take this webinar. And also thank you, BITS Institute of Physiotherapy, for giving me this opportunity. I think the first thing that comes to the mind when a physiotherapist hears the word peripheral nerve injuries is electrical stimulation and passive movements. So then is our role as a physiotherapist just limited to ES and passive movements, or is there something more? Goals of management are now shifting towards quality of life. And quality of life definitely involves more than physical, mental, emotional, and social health. So then is our role limited only to the physical aspect, or do we have a role in the other components of quality of health? When a patient comes to us with a PNI, what does the patient have in mind? What does the patient want from you as a physiotherapist? Patient has many questions. Will I get better? And if you say yes, then when will I get better? As a physiotherapist, how confident are you going to be in answering these questions of is the patient going to be better or we're not sure? So at the end of this webinar, the participant should have a clear idea of the advantage and the use of knowledge of anatomy and physiology of nerves. Why should the participant know about the classification of nerve injuries? And what is the role of a physiotherapist in the assessment and in the three stages of a PNI? That is in the stage of paralysis, stage of recovery, and what happens when there is a non-recovered PNI. So at the end of this webinar, I hope the participant is clear with these objectives. If we start with the anatomy, formation of nerves, peripheral nerves are a bundle of axons. And these axons are protoplasmic extensions of what is there in the spinal cord. So the dorsal nerve root and the ventral nerve root, these two join to form the spinal nerve. On the course, on the way, they are you have fibers of the sympathetic ganglion joining in, and this spinal nerve then exits from the intervertebral foramen. Once it comes out from there, it divides into anterior rami and posterior rami. Posterior rami may continue on itself to supply the trunk. So you have the thoracic nerves supplying the neck, the thorax, and you have the anterior rami, anterior branches, which join to form the plexus. So you have the brachial plexus, you have lumbar plexus, you have lumbosacral plexus. And then these are dividing into the peripheral nerves which supply the limbs. And they have a sensory supply, a motor supply, and since they have the sympathetic fibers as well, so they are supplying the blood vessels. So the peripheral nervous system has about 12 cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. What is the function of these spinal nerves, or what is the structure of these spinal nerves? Next. So you have the axon in the center, and the axon is surrounded or covered by the myelin sheath, and then that is covered by the endoneurium. So each nerve has a conducting part and a supporting system. So the endoneurium, perineurium, and the epineurium are the supporting tissue, whereas the axon is the conducting tissue. Bundles of axons surrounded by the endoneurium are then carried in fascicles, and these fascicles together are covered by the epineurium. So epineurium is the outermost cover of the nerve, and the thickness of this epineurium is almost 50% of the cross-sectional area of the nerve. So you can imagine how thin the axon is. The epineurium is almost 50% of the nerve cross-sectional area, and this contains axons covered by endoneurium in these bundles, and between these fascicles, the connective tissue that is there, that is called as the perineurium. So axon and endoneurium are very fragile, very thin, and epineurium is really thick and protects the nerve. So one function of the axon is conducting impulses from the higher centers to the peripheral system, that is the muscle or the skin or the blood vessels and other organs. The other important function of these axons is axonal transport. So what these axons do is they have 3 or 4 axonal transport systems depending on the speed of transport. And these axonal transport systems transport content like mitochondria, acetylcholine or neurotransmitters. They transmit nerve growth factors, and they transmit other nutrients to the end organ, that is the muscle. So this is an important thing to remember in the anatomy and physiology or the function, that the nerve not only conducts impulses, but it conducts nutrients, mitochondria, nerve growth factors, and neurotransmitters to the muscle. So when a nerve injury occurs, besides the stop in the conduction, you have a stop in this axonal transport. And this leads to the atrophy of the muscles that take place with a peripheral nerve injury. Next. So the next point is classification of nerve injuries. And why do you need to know this classification? Classification was done by 2 people. So we have Seddon's classification and Sunderland's classification. Seddon classified it in 1943, and Sir Sidney Sunderland classified peripheral nerve injuries in 1951. So Seddon has 3 grades: neurapraxia, axonotmesis, and neurotmesis. And Seddon has 5 grades. Grade 1 of Sunderland and neurapraxia is the same. So this yellow color is the axon, and the blue color on top of it is the myelin sheath. So in grade 1 neurapraxia, you just have demyelination of the axon. Axon is in continuity, And so are all the three coverings, the endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium. There is no injury to any of the coverings except the myelin sheath. So the nerve is almost normal below the level of injury, wherever the compression is there, and it is normal above. So once this compression is relieved, the person is going to recover and gets normal. The important thing to remember here is that the person is going to present with complete paralysis of whichever axons are compressed. The best example of a neurapraxia is a facial nerve palsy. So a person comes with inability to close the eyes or show the teeth, and that is complete. Okay, but that is a neurapraxia because there was compression of the facial nerve in the facial canal. The second, third, and fourth grades of Sunderland classification can be equal to the axonotmesis of Seddon, and grade 5 is neurotmesis of Seddon's classification. So if you look at grade 5, there is a complete disruption of axon, endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium. So it's a complete transection of the nerve where you have a cut. Grade 2 is only injury of the axon. Grade 3 is injury of the axon and the endoneurium. And grade 4 is injury of axon, endoneurium, and perineurium with the epineurial sheath intact. So the tube is intact. Whenever the axon regenerates, it still knows where to go in the epineurial tube. And if we look at grade 5, if the proximal end of the axon is regenerating, it does not know where to go because there is no tube, there is no channel for it to pass. We need to understand this classification because the prognosis of the patient is going to depend on this degree of classification. So when the patient asks you, will I get better and when? The answer is going to depend on if you can classify this injury into a neurapraxia, neurotmesis, or somewhere in between. Prognosis of grade 4 and 5 is bad. Prognosis of 1 is excellent. Prognosis of 2 is also good. And prognosis of grade 3 injury, we're not very sure. But yes, chances of recovery are there, but may or may not be complete. Whenever we have a surgery that is taking place for a peripheral nerve injury, what they do is epineurial suturing. So they are converting, the surgeon converts grade 5 into a grade 4 injury because the epineurium then becomes in continuity and you have a grade 4 injury. But prognosis of both are still not good. So if you have a patient coming with grade 4 or 5 injury, you may not want to be very enthusiastic about the prognosis, but you never give up hope. You always wait for nature to take care. How do we know what grade of injury is present? The answer is not actually simple, but the answer only comes from your assessment. And in the assessment, it comes from the history. So next slide. This is a table that is showing the structures that are present and absent depending on the injury. So grade 1, neurapraxia, you have everything is present. No anatomical disruption is taking place. And in grade 5, you have disruption of all the axon and all the coverings. And in between, you have the other grades. That takes us to assessment. Next slide. So in the assessment, like I said, next, you can go to the history slide. So you have the subjective assessment in which you are going to look at the history. And history is going to tell you what type of injury the person had. So you ask questions of when did it happen, how did it happen, was the onset slow or sudden? But these questions should give you information. So if we look at a radial nerve injury, a patient coming to us with a wrist drop, and you ask them what happened. If the answer is that I was sitting on the chair last night, and when I got up in the morning, I got up with this wrist drop. The chances are that it is a Saturday night palsy, and there is compression. And because of this compression, there is a neurapraxia. So when the person comes with this kind of history that I was just sitting and I got up in the morning with wrist drop, chances are that it is a neuropraxia. There's another patient who was walking on the road and a two-wheeler come and dashes him and he falls on the road. He sustains a fracture shaft humerus, and along with that fracture shaft humerus, he also injures the radial nerve. So here, if we look at it, the impact of injury was not very severe. So if we can think about it, the injury would be a grade 2 Sunderland's classification, or we just have an injury of the axon and the endoneurium that has taken place. And on the other side, we have a person who's driving along the highway with a helmet on the bike. The speed is around 100 kilometers per hour. And then he dashes into the vehicle in front of him in this speed. He falls on, he doesn't know where, he's unconscious, he lost consciousness at the time of injury. And then he is diagnosed with a radial nerve injury along with the fracture shaft humerus. So this person would have been more probably a neurotmesis injury or a grade 4 Sunderland's classification. So depending on the history and how the injury took place, we can come to know whether it's a neurapraxia, axonotmesis, or neurotmesis. There is no other way, no other test of finding out what is the type of injury. The only other way we can come to know is let time go by. If recovery starts soon, then it's probably a grade 1, 2. If recovery does not happen at the required time, then it is a grade 4 and 5. So history is most important if you want to answer the question, is the person going to recover and how soon? So don't just collect information and write it in your book, but just try and analyze that information. So, okay, if the person has had a high impact fracture, then maybe the injury is more severe. Radial nerve injuries can also take place at the time of surgery. So during the surgery, it was injured. So again, that points to a grade 3 or 4 axonotmesis. So it's going to be a little more severe. Another way in which radial nerve palsy can take place is, okay, I had the injury, I had the surgery, and after surgery, in about 2 or 3 weeks, I started developing the wrist drop. So then maybe there is callus formation that has taken place, which is impinging on the radial nerve. So for this person, then he probably needs to go into surgery so that the callus can be, the nerve can be released from the callus. So history is very important in diagnosing the type of injury. Next, so you want to know the mechanism of injury, whether it was stretch related. The example is the radial nerve injury that I did discuss, and also brachial plexus injury that takes place. Erb's palsy that takes place is a stretch related injury. Example of laceration is the median nerve that is cut at the wrist. So you have a clean cut. Again, it is a neurotmesis, or you have a glass cut. And the third type of mechanism is a compression. So compression is the facial nerve injury that takes place, or the Saturday night palsy. So you want to know about the mechanism of injury from the history, whether it is open, closed, and if there is any other cause. So whether it was a heat injury, thermal injury, burns, electric, chemical, there are a lot of causes for nerve injury, leprosy, infections, etc. Next. So once you are done with the history, you want to go into the examination, the objective part. So you're going to observe the attitude, the posture of the part. So you could have a claw hand, you could have a wrist drop. You want to observe the parts as well. The other thing that you observe is muscle atrophy. Here I need to make it clear that muscle atrophy following denervation is different from muscle atrophy that takes place with disuse. You have atrophy in both these conditions. There's a person who has a fracture shaft femur and is not using the quadriceps. And on the other side, you have a person with fracture of the, you have injury of the femoral nerve, and this person also has quadriceps wasting. These both are going to be very different. And like I told you, there is axonal transport, which is going to be missing with denervation. This axonal transport is there when you are not using the part in disuse atrophy. So the atrophy of a PNI is more severe than it is with disuse. And I'm not very sure whether electrical stimulation can actually delay this atrophy, because with electrical stimulation, you are only stimulating the muscle. You are not doing anything to the axonal transport, where you need to have the nerve growth factors and the nutrients that come along with it. You also observe for edema. Edema I'll talk about a little later. Trophic changes take place. One of the reasons is a decrease in the blood supply that is there, and the other reason is the sympathetic disturbance that may have happened. So, because the sympathetic supply is lost, the vasomotor system is affected, and that leads to drying of the skin, and the skin is also cold to touch. And you could also palpate the toe. Next, then you want to go in for some more examination where you're going to examine sensations. For sensations, you need to examine it nerve wise and not dermatome wise. Each nerve has its own supply. Please do not examine it dermatome wise. Also, when we look at peripheral nerve, there is a lot of overlapping of this nerve supply to the skin. So the whole area is not affected, and you need to know the um, autonomous zones of the nerve supply. So if you had the radial nerve injury, you probably want to test the sensations in the snuff box. So you need to know these autonomous zones of the various nerves and test the sensations mainly over there. The other way you could do is just ask the person to map the whole area where the sensations are affected, whether it is completely lost or it is partially lost. So you could have mapping of the area also. Range of motion, I would focus more on the passive range, because the active range then comes with the MMT. So MMT, the person needs to be really careful, because trick movements, you don't need to teach a patient trick movements. You are just asking him to make a fist. Just doing this is going to try and tell you that the flexors are probably a grade 1 when they were actually 0. Okay. So whenever in doubt, you should be giving the lower grade, and then as time goes by, if it was 1, it's going to go from 1 to 2, and so you are going to get recovery also taking place. So be very careful about trick movements when you are doing MMT, and the question is always between whether it is 0 or 1. The question is not whether it is 4 or 5. 4 or 5, it does not make a lot of difference, but 0 and 1 makes a lot of difference to the diagnosis and the prognosis. Whenever the MMT is 1, you are hopeful that it is an incomplete injury or the injury is recovering. And you could also test the deep tendon reflexes and the girth. Girth, you could have wasting as well as swelling, so you need to be balanced about it. Next. Then you have the special tests for each nerve, so specific tests for the nerve. So in this figure, there is the pointing index finger that is shown. When the person is asked to flex the fingers, in a median nerve injury, he is not able to flex the nerves. So there are specific tests for specific nerves which you can look at. Then you have Tinel's sign, which is not done in the beginning of the assessment, but it is done during the reassessment that you are taking place. Tinel sign is going to tell you whether there is a recovery taking place or not. Tinel's sign is to be done from the distal part and go proximally. You should tap the place slowly, progress slowly. Sorry. So you should tap it along the course of the nerve and go from proximal to distal, and go slowly, because if you go very fast, the person doesn't know where the tingling started. And the point at which the tingling starts, whether it's here, can be marked, and you could mark the distance from a fixed point. So today it is here, after 2 weeks it is here, after another 2 weeks it's coming down. So Tinel sign is going to progress distally, but you do it from distal to proximal. This is definitely a sign of recovery. Now, with Tinel's sign, if you did it today, and you could get the tingling numbness taking place here. After 2 weeks, again it's the same place. After another 2 weeks, again it is the same place. Then this is not a sign of recovery, but it is a sign of neuroma. So neuroma is that the nerve endings that were exposed, that were probably regenerating, are now in a bundle, and then it's not moving further. The recovery is not moving further. So a static Tinel sign is not a good sign of is not good prognosis, but a progressive Tinel sign is definitely a sign of prognosis. And you could tell your patient even before the movement starts happening, you can say that yes, you're going to recover, and chances seem to be good. And then you have the sweat test, which is testing the autonomic function. You can put ninhydrin powder, or you could put starch powder, which changes the color if the person part is sweating, and if it is not sweating, the color does not change. And then we have our forte, that is the electrodiagnostic tests. You could use the strength duration curve, NCVs, electromyography. NCVs, that's okay, but electromyography is an invasive procedure which has needles, but it is the gold standard to diagnose denervation. So when you get fibrillation potentials on the EMG, that means you are in grade 2, 3, 4, or 5. But EMG cannot tell you whether it is 2 or whether it is 5. That only your history can tell you that it is axonotmesis or a neurotmesis. And if there are no FPs on EMG, then it is a neuropraxia. Strength duration curves, they are easy to do, they are quick to do, they're non-invasive and not painful as well. You could do it as soon as you wanted it, but the confirmed diagnosis can take place only after 21 days. So if you did the SDC on day 2, 3, 4, and if it shows that there is, it's a normal curve, so it does not show denervation, then you cannot stamp the condition as normal. But on day 3, 4, 5, if it starts showing denervation, if it starts showing a PRD and a CRD, then that means that yes, axonotmesis is taking place and the injury is bad. So till 10, 12 days, if you are getting a normal curve, you should be happy, and it can be done at any time. But a SDC on day before 20 days cannot confirm the diagnosis of normal. SDC before 20 days can confirm axonotmesis. So if you have a CRD on day 5, day 6, then it is confirming axonotmesis. You don't need to then repeat it again. But if it is normal, then you need to repeat it till another 15 days or 20 days. Next. So at the end of your assessment, you want to know will the patient get better or not. So what is the information that you have gathered? You want to know the type of lesion. If you can come to know whether it is a neuropraxia, axonotmesis, or neurotmesis. You want to know the level of lesion. Okay, we're talking of the factors affecting prognosis. So level of lesion, more proximal the lesion, worse is the prognosis. Distal the lesion, better is the prognosis. If it is a mixed nerve, the prognosis is not so good. If it is a pure motor or a pure sensory nerve, prognosis is better. This is because when regeneration takes place, the motor axon may go into the sensory tube, and then that does not serve the purpose of function. So if it's a pure motor nerve, then the axons can regenerate into any tube and get functional. The type of nerve endings, especially if it is a grade 4 or 5, so if it's a clean cut and then it is sutured, the prognosis is a little better than when the endings are frayed and then you are trying to suture them. Also, if the gap between the two ends is a little more, then the prognosis is bad, because when they are sutured together, they are going to be under tension. So that is why early nerve surgery repairs are a little more advisable, so that this gap does not occur and they are in close approximation. The associated injuries like a tendon injury or a fracture is going to delay the movement that takes place because you need to be careful about tendon repairs. So that also affects the prognosis. Like I said, a delay in suturing or tension on the suture line or the type of surgery is going to affect the prognosis. Children have a better prognosis than the older people. And if your general health, if the patient's general health has diabetes or other associated conditions, the prognosis again is a little hampered. So at the end of your assessment, next, the information that you should be knowing is what nerve is injured. So it's the radial nerve that is injured on the right side at the spiral groove. Time of onset, you need to describe it in how many weeks post injury are we there. So we don't want the date of injury, but if you could describe it as it's 3 weeks old or it's 6 weeks old, then that tells you whether I'm going to expect recovery or not. So there is this uh, recovery of 1 mm per day. So if that's 3 months have passed, so that's 90 days. If it's 3 weeks, then it's 21 days. At 21 days, you're not going to expect some kind of recovery taking place um, from the spiral groove to the brachioradialis. You may or may not expect it. So you can calculate your distance and calculate the days that is going to take for recovery. And that is why the time of onset is important. The type of injury is, if you could diagnose that as a neuropraxia or neurotmesis, that would be good. You could also put in the cause of injury. So there was a fracture shaft humerus along with it. And if it's in the later stages, then you want to know whether there is a contracture that's developed or if there is a sign of recovery. Then what? The sign of recovery up to brachioradialis or extensor digitorum, you could describe it in those terms. So if you have this kind of information, this makes your physical and not functional, but the physical diagnosis more complete. So once you have your diagnosis, then you want to go into the management. So the next slide. Physiotherapy management, the impairments would include sensory deficits, muscle weakness or paralysis. The person is going to have loss of function, pain, edema, a decrease in the joint range of motion, wounds and scars may be present, and psychological issues are definitely going to be there. If you can imagine getting up in the morning with your face deviated to one side and not knowing what has happened, the first thing that comes to your mind is a hemiplegia or stroke as well. And then a facial palsy, the next person you meet is going to ask you what happened to your face, what happened to your face, and the person needs an answer to that. So psychological issues are really present in peripheral nerve injuries, and as a physiotherapist our role is more the next slide, reassurance of recovery. So if we can reassure the patient of what has happened, and and that happens only if you know what has happened and how soon the person is going to get better. So your assessment should give you information of how you can talk to your patient. So during the acute stage or stage of paralysis, the aims would be reassurance of recovery, maintaining the range of motion of affected joints and preventing contractures, maintaining the blood circulation, preventing and managing edema, and maintaining the activity and power of the unaffected muscles and the length of the unaffected muscles. Next. You also want to prevent or delay muscle atrophy. You want to treat the pain that is present. You need to teach the person about care of the anesthetic part and protection of the area, anesthetic area. And if there are wounds or scars, you may want to manage that. Next. So how do we go about this? Next. So the first thing is reassurance of recovery. If you can be sure that it was a neuropraxia, from the history, it was a Saturday night palsy or it was a facial palsy, which is going to recover from the STC, it is not affected, then you can generate that confidence in your patient that yes, it's going to recover. But the most important thing is time. You have to wait. It's going to take time. Even neuropraxias take about 3 weeks to recover. So you have to wait for 3 weeks or a month. Even to start recovery, you need about 15 days. So, and then recovery is going to progress. So the whole thing takes about 3 months. And nowadays, patients don't have time. What they want is immediate recovery or getting better immediately. So you need to convince them that time is the main factor and you have to be patient. So you have to describe the course of the lesion, that recovery takes place at 1 mm per day, and you have to wait. And during this time, when you are doing the regular assessment, you can tell your patient that, see, this was not there earlier, now this is there. A physiotherapist is going to be the first person to recognize a change in whatever has happened. So if the person was like this, he may still not be able to use the hand, or he may be using the hand. But from here, he has now come here, and or now come here. Okay. And that is what you will need to tell your patient, that, see, initially you were here and now you are here. And this is going to come in with an improvement in the grip, because the tenodesis action was weak here. Here it is going to get better. So regular assessment can tell the person that sensory recovery is taking place, Tinel sign is progressing, or motor power is coming in. And during this stage, psychological counseling is going to be very important to improve the quality of life of the patient in that phase. Next. So the person has a loss of sensations in some particular area. This is going to be more important when you have the ulnar nerve injury. So this part which keeps contacting a surface needs to be protected. Or if you had an injury in the lower limb where the sole of the foot has less sensations, that is the time when you need to, or even otherwise, you need to teach the person care about the affected part. So the person needs to know that swelling and pain should not come in. Whatever I am doing, I'm using the part, pain should not come in. The person can use gloves or protective footwear to avoid injury. Safety is important. So the joint and the skin need to be protected. The joint, if it is like this, these structures are going to get stretched. So the paralyzed muscles are stretched. Stretching is going to injure the muscles. So we don't want this. So this is what we do. So we can either teach them proper positioning by just giving them support, or we could give them a splint. There are certain parts of the body which they cannot look at. So they need to keep looking at the part to see if there is any reddening, if there is any discoloration, if there is any injury, because that pain may not be present initially. So you have to keep looking at the part, keep observing the part. And if the part cannot be directly observed, you may want to use a mirror as well. You need to protect the part from heat and cold, extreme temperatures. You need to keep the part clean. And if they are given splints, then you need to teach the proper care of splints, that they need to remove it every 2 hours, and observe the part for pressure sores or pressure areas, that they do not become red. And when they remove the splints, they should do a full range of movement and then tie the splint again. Next. Then next is our favorite, electrical stimulation. Why do you want to give it? You want to prevent, delay muscle atrophy, and you want to maintain the properties of the muscle. So properties of the muscle is contraction. Natural contractions are tetanic. Contractions with electrical stimulations are twitch. But electrical stimulation is widely used and recommended tool by physiotherapists. There are many variations that are used in the parameters, but most of the literature suggests that you can use a low frequency, long pulse duration current. That means our IG, 1 per second, 1 contraction per second, and it is a long pulse duration. The only thing that it suggests is that you need to give it for a long period of time. So literature says that it needs to be given for 1 hour per day, and you need to give it much before denervation has progressed. ES may or may not help in the recovery, but for helping recovery, we also have other modalities like ultrasound and PEME and laser. So pulsed electromagnetic energy and laser have also shown to enhance recovery, but I won't comment on that right now. We come to ES again. The use of ES is controversial over the decades. Next slide. ES has been said that it maintains the muscle mass and the strength until renervation occurs. But most of these studies have been done on animals. and there is limited research in human beings. There are a lot of studies which also conclude that electrical stimulation may delay recovery, it may inhibit reinnervation, and therefore it should not be used for anyone and everyone. And compared to controls, there is no added benefit that takes place, and it sometimes leads to incomplete or delayed recovery. The major reason for this is it interferes with the axonal transport. So axonal transport is taking place like this, and stimulation that comes from here is going like this. So it inhibits the axonal transport that is coming in to the muscle. This is especially if you are using the Faradic current. So with all this research being controversial, it makes ES less feasible, uncomfortable, and time consuming because you're stimulating each muscle. Each muscle needs to be stimulated for an hour. That's not actually practical. So whether we actually want to give electrical stimulation or not should be something that we are using our. And like I said, atrophy is not because of disuse, but atrophy is because of loss of axonal transport. So does ES help promote axonal transport? The answer is definitely no. So whether you want to use ES or not, you can think about it. The next slide is preventing edema and maintaining the blood circulation. Edema is a bigger culprit than the atrophy. Before treating the edema, we need to know the reasons for edema. There are two. One is not doing anything. So when you are not doing anything, the part is in a gravity dependent position. There is a loss of active movement. So when there is no active movement, part is towards gravity, you start getting edema getting collected. There is stasis of fluid. Blood circulation is already affected. So edema comes in. Now what does this edema do? Edema is going to compress on the muscles, the soft tissues that are here. And once it compresses this muscle, it affects the blood circulation of the muscles as well. And once the blood circulation is affected, nutrition to the muscle is affected. Nutrition getting affected leads to injury of the muscle, inflammation of the muscle, further edema, and the muscle starts recovering with fibrosis. Once the muscle is converted into a fibrous tissue, it loses its property of contraction. And if it cannot contract, even if the nerve regenerates back to that muscle, the muscle cannot contract because it has converted from muscle into fibrous tissue. So rather than preventing atrophy by ES, one needs to prevent the edema. So one reason for the edema is not doing anything. And the other reason for edema is doing too much. So if you do too much, so you're doing vigorous physiotherapy, lot of passive movements, you're doing electrical stimulation at a high intensity, you may end up injuring the muscle by doing so many things. And if you injure the muscle, again, it's the same thing, injury, inflammation, recovery with fibrosis. So whatever you do, you need to be careful so that you don't injure the muscle and you don't convert the muscle tissue into a fibrous tissue. So to maintain the blood circulation and prevent and manage this edema, you can use active movements of whatever muscles are present, and whatever muscles are not present, you could use passive movements for that movement. Avoiding this gravity dependent position, so you're going to use elevation. You can use bandaging. If you have bandaging, again the same thing, you need to remove it after 2 hours, keep the part open for some time, let the blood circulate, do some movements, and then again tie the bandage or a splint. You could also use massage, but the more important thing is you have to prevent injury to the affected part. Okay, so this edema can otherwise organize, get converted into fibrin, fibrosis, and make the muscle non-functional. So once, next slide. From the stage of paralysis, then you come into a stage of recovery. So the muscle has been recovering, or the nerve has been recovering at 1 mm per day, and it starts supplying the first muscle, and you start getting a flicker of contraction. So that is going to be the recovery stage. Here the aims are muscle re-education, strengthening, sensory re-education, and functional training. Next slide. So you want to, sensations are going to be recovering before the motor actually comes in. And once you get some recovery of sensations, you could re-educate these sensations by various textures. You need to go in from rough textures to light textures. The recovery pattern that takes place with the PNI is that pain comes in first, then the perception to slow vibration, then the perception to moving touch, then the perception to constant touch, and then the perception to rapid vibration. So this is how even you could progress. So painful stimuli, constant touch, rapid vibration. You could move in this direction for the sensory re-education. Awareness comes in from the proximal area downwards. So the proximal part is going to recover first, and then the distal part is going to recover. And once recovery takes place, you can complete the functional sensory re-education by giving familiar objects or surfaces in the hand for identification. Next. Sensory recovery, and then you have motor re-education. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details of these, but you know the Roots technique. You can use PNF. You could So you could use your techniques of facilitation to re-educate the motor aspect. Also, synergy patterns can be used, and the muscle starts functioning initially in the synergy and then individually as a agonist. It is easier to hold the part than to do a movement. So you could place and hold, or you could do eccentric work before the concentric work. More power is generated when you are doing a eccentric contraction. So you could use those principles of resistance and training for re-education and strengthening. You could also use EMG biofeedback or other biofeedback techniques for motor re-education. Next. So then you have the flicker of contraction, and from there it's going to progress to movements and strengthening. So here again you have your techniques of strengthening. You begin in a gravity eliminated plane and then progress further. You could increase the number of contractions, you could increase the resistance, you can increase the leverage. And you could use PNFs, multiple angle isometrics, you could use PRE. So you have all your equipment that you can use: TheraBands, weight cuffs, dumbbells, springs for the resistance strengthening, strength training. Next. Once they have the sensory recovery and the motor recovery, hand in hand goes the functional training. So you're always going to encourage independence in ADL. You don't wait for some kind of recovery to take place and then start doing function. So incorporate all the recovery into functional activities side by side, encourage the independence in ADL. You can always allow trick movements, because the trick movement is not in control of a therapist or the patient. The patient wants to do function. So he is going to manage function by a trick movement. And that should be allowed, that should be encouraged, and that can be corrected later on as recovery comes in. And for function, if required, environment can also be modified. If the recovery is not so much, you can get things down to a lower level. So some amount of shoulder flexion can allow the person to reach out to things. But function is very important in keeping the mental health of the patient intact. Next. So that will lead to the person recovering completely if they do. But on the other side, we have these grade 4 and 5 injuries, which then get converted into a chronic stage or non-recovering injuries. For these patients, we need to teach them compensatory strategies so that they can continue with their ADLs. You need to teach them the protection. They need to emphasize more on that, especially if it is, like I said, the ulnar nerve or the foot, so that complications don't occur and that does not make their life more miserable. In the chronic stage, you could go in for surgeries. Nerve repair is done even earlier on, but I just mentioned it here because it's not part of my seminar today. But you could go in for nerve repairs, nerve grafts, neurolysis. You could go in for muscle transfers, tendon transfers. And in this chronic stage, if the joint is flail and that is not allowing the part to move, then it can be arthrodesed in a functional position of some amount of extension so that the fingers then can be used. Or if the brachial plexus injury is leading to a very painful upper limb, then you can probably go in for amputation of the limb as well. Something that's non functional and painful. So, we look at what are the problems in this chronic stage. You could have contractures and stiffness. Pain is a big problem. You could have skin lesions, which you want to avoid, and you have to prevent it rather than treat it. So, if you look at pain that comes in the chronic stage, next slide. The causes for pain could be complex regional pain syndromes. So that could be the type 1 or type 2, which is the reflex sympathetic dystrophy or causalgia. Since we have the nerves and since we have the sympathetic system coming along with it, there could be a sympathetic disturbance which is going to cause pain. The other reason for pain could be a neuroma. So that is going to be static. And during the recovery phase, you could have inflammation also, which is giving pain, or stretching of the part, which is giving pain, but that can be taken care of. So if you had CRPS, you could probably use TENS, IFT, you could use tapping techniques, you could use massage. And since this becomes a chronic pain, so you have management of chronic pain that comes in either with management or CBT, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. If you had a neuroma, which keeps whenever it's touched, you have tingling coming in or you have pain coming in, then you may want to use desensitization techniques. Desensitization techniques are opposite of sensory re-education. So in sensory re-education, you started off with rough textures and then go to re-educating the person to a soft texture. With desensitization, you want to start with soft, smooth textures which are not painful. And once the person can start tolerating those soft textures, then you go in for rougher textures. With sensory re education, you want to be stimulating. So you could probably stimulate from distal to proximal. For desensitization techniques, you want to soothe. So you may want to go from proximal to distal. So they are two opposite things. So you should know what you are doing with those sensory techniques. If there were skins, wounds that are unhealed, you could use laser, ultrasound, hydrotherapy, whirlpool baths, massage. A point on scar mobilization. If the scar is adhered to the skin, you could use ultrasound, you could use laser, or you could use friction massage. All these things, you need to know whether the tendons are adhered to the scar or not. So this kind of movement, if it takes place along with movement at the scar, then it means that the tendons are adhered to the scar. And if you are giving physiotherapy, then scar management should be done with the fingers in a stretched position or the tendons in a stretched position. And then you could use your friction massage or ultrasound for the scar. Next. And finally, in whatever stage of recovery your patient is, integration into community is the final goal. Improving the quality of life is the final goal. So, whatever happens, you need to teach your patient, generate confidence in your patient, and acceptance of the situation that whatever has happened has happened. You may or may not be able to do anything, but you need to continue living on. The person can go in for disability assessment where the government can aid in some way. There is employment for these people. There is some reservation for these people with disabilities. So depending on the amount of disability they have, um, they can uh, get this disability certificate. And they could have a long-term use of splints or instruments. They can modify the way in which they can do the work so that work is easier. So you could use instruments for daily living that can be used. Next. So So, to summarize, it's very important to understand the anatomy, mechanics, and physiology of the nerves. If you have understood this, you can generate confidence in yourself and the patient about what is going to happen. So, the next point is reassurance of the patient. Uh, and the role of physiotherapy is more of protection of the part till nature does the healing. The axon regeneration that takes place is totally a natural phenomenon. Till now, we cannot do anything to enhance this regeneration. Things are coming up, say maybe gene therapy or something, but as of now, it's mainly nature doing its work, and we have to wait and keep the patient till nature does the healing. Until then, we need to not till then, but even otherwise, we need to maintain the functionality and the independence of the patient. Please allow trick movements, please allow function. Do not make the patient dependent on someone else, and enhance the recovery as it progresses. So only a physiotherapist will know that there is this change taking place. Every small change that takes place, you can enhance it and uh, help the patient recover, or notice these recoveries and enhance the confidence of your patient. So I take this opportunity to thank BITS Institute of Physiotherapy once again. Thank you. And thank you all the patient listeners.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh, it was a really very informative session. Now we will be have a live question answer session. So if you have any queries, please ask in the message box. Okay. Ma'am, we have one question from Krupa Patel. Can you please repeat the difference between the behavioral therapy and desensitization theory? Based.
Okay. No, they are two different things. Cognitive behavioral therapy is treatment of chronic pain by working on the cognitive aspect of the patient. So you are teaching the patient to accept the pain, because chronic pain is not something that takes place at a peripheral level, but chronic pain is something that takes place because of central nervous system changes. So this pain does not need to be managed with TENS, IFT, or diathermy or something locally, but it needs to be managed by changing the behavior of the patient. So CBT is a different aspect that comes with pain management. Desensitization is different from sensory re-education or sensory stimulation. So if you want, I can clarify that part. Okay, so sensory re-education ma, the patient does not have any sensations, and with the first sign of sensory recovery, you want to enhance that sensation. So you are going to, like I said on that slide, the first sensation that returns is pain. Then you have vibration sense coming in, slow vibration. Then you have moving touch, then constant touch, and then you have fast vibration. So whichever sensory part is recovering, you could use slightly painful stimuli. So let's not go to pain, but we use rough stimuli like a Scotch Brite, or the thing used for cleaning the vessels. So you could use that, or you could use sandpaper, and you could stimulate the area with that. So that is sensory stimulation. But if the person has developed a neuroma is going to cause pain. The presentation may be tingling only, tingling and severe pain. So that area needs to be desensitized. And for that, you could use softer textures where you are using soft stimulation, soft touches, smooth touches. And once the patient can tolerate those softer textures, softer touches, then you can go in for the more rough stimuli.
Yes, ma'am. We have another question from Mihir Mehta. When to take SAC? I mean, should we take it after Wolverine degeneration, or we can take any time?
When to take?
FDC, SDC. When to take
Okay.
STC?
Yeah. So there is no fixed rule that STC has to be taken at 21 days. The rule is how to interpret the STC. So on the third day, if you are doing STC, or on the fifth day, if you are doing it, and it shows you a CRD, that means degeneration is complete. Then you don't need to do a follow up after 21 days. The fifth day of the injury is telling you that there is denervation, or even for NCV for that matter. You could do the NCV also on day 5, and if it shows a conduction not taking place, or the SDC shows a CRD, then it is saying that the denervation is over. And nowadays, it is happening very fast. Initially, it was said that denervation starts, Wallerian degeneration starts after 7 days and takes 21 days to complete. But now it says that degeneration starts on the second or third day itself and can be completed by 5 or 7 days. So if denervation is complete and your STC shows you a CRD, a complete reaction of denervation, then that is stamping denervation. But on day 5 or day 7 or day 10, if you did it and it showed you a normal curve or it shows you a PRD, then you need to again repeat it on subsequent days, say day 15 or day 21. And if on day 21 it still shows you a PRD, then you can say that it is a incomplete injury. Or if it is normal on day 21, then you can say that it is a neurapraxia. So the restriction is not on when to do it, the restriction is on how you interpret the SDC.
Okay, ma'am. We have again one question from Krupa Patel. She want to ask what about the distal to proximal pattern. I think she want to ask regarding to the roots technique.
Yes, so if you want to do stimulation, you're going to go from distal to proximal. That can be either motor re-education or sensory re-education. But if you want to do a soothing effect, you want to do desensitization, then you want to go in like this, proximal to distal. So that again is the difference between desensitization and sensory re-education. This is soothing, this is stimulating.
Okay, ma'am. One question from Krimisha. She want to ask what can we do to minimize the pain in chronic or non-recovery stage.
Yeah, so then you have to know the cause for the pain. One of the causes could be the autonomic disturbance that is there. So we could try physiotherapy for that. TENS does help, but that needs to be done continuously. So you could take a mobile TENS and the person can use it. There is no harm with that. Or you could use IFT also. Or you could use these soothing techniques. The other one is then you have to go in for the chronic pain management. The chronic pain management is going to include CBT, that is cognitive behavioral therapy, where you are working on the CNS system. There are other newer techniques also for chronic pain that can be incorporated. One is, I think, PPE, but that probably goes out of the uh, scope of this seminar, management of chronic pain. But you need to diagnose that whether it is the stretching that is causing the pain, whether it is inflammation that is causing the pain. So then you can use even the supporting techniques, or there is another cause for the pain. When the pain is not related to a movement, then the pain probably has a higher cause.
Okay. Ma'am, there is one another question from Krupa. How we can apply massage on horizontal and the vertical scar, like in which direction?
Horizontal or vertical. Whenever you have a scar, it is never adhered in the whole length. So if I had a scar like this, if it is an injury scar, it is going to be horizontal. If it is a surgery scar, it is going to be vertical. And only the ends of the scar are generally adherent. So that is where you need to work? I didn't understand whether Suchel, can you
She is
repeat the
asking,
question? Hmm.
yes, ma'am. She is asking, can we can apply massage on horizontal and vertical scar, like in which direction? I think she is asking related to friction massage. Krupa.
Yes, but if it is, Krupa says yes. So whatever is the position of the scar, that is not so important. It is where it is adhered and whether it is the tendons are adhered to the scar or not. So even if it is a vertical scar, you could still stretch the tendons and release the wherever it is adhered. And if it is horizontal also, that is how you have to do it. In fact, a vertical scar is going to have less adhesions on the tendon than a horizontal scar. And a horizontal scar is more of a culprit, and that happens when you have a glass cut injury or a sword cut injury or a knife injury. Vertical scars are more of post surgical ones, and that does not actually give a adherence.
Okay, ma'am. Another question from Palak Baru. She want to ask, can we do for RSD syndrome? What can we do for RSD syndrome?
You could use IFT, and depending on which stage the person is, you could use heat or cold. Stage 1 check is stage 2 check. Whatever they are not sensitive to, you could use that as well. So initially you don't want to give the heat. Initially they may be sensitive to cold also, so you want to avoid that, but later on maybe you could use it. Or you could just use IFT and stop physiotherapy. A lot of times you don't need to do physiotherapy as well. So, like I said, there are two reasons for the edema. One is not doing anything, and one is doing too much. So, if you can recognize that you are overdoing things, stop. Like if you had a Colles fracture and a vigorous movement starts giving swelling and a shiny skin, stop physiotherapy. So, the same thing if with a PNI you can diagnose it. You could use IFT in the right parameters, but you need to see whether that helps or not.
Ma'am, I think we have covered all the questions.
Okay.
On behalf of entire BITS Physiotherapy team, I'd like to thank you that in spite of your busy schedule, you grabbed some time for us and share your valuable knowledge with us. Thank you so much, ma'am. I
I thank BITS Institute of Physiotherapy once again for giving me this opportunity. It was nice being here.
uh,
Thank you.
yes, ma'am. I extend my thanks to our honorable founder, president and chairman, Jagdish Bhai Patel sir, for Jagdishbhai Patel sir, our joint managing trustee, Srimati Kamalben J. Patel ma'am, for their constant guidance. I also like to thank our CMD, Shri Dhruv J. Patel sir, to allowing us for organizing such events. I like to thank our campus director, Ms. Hardi Patel ma'am, for constant motivation and support. I like to extend my thanks to our principal, Dr. Mehul Jadhav sir, and Vice Principal, Dr. Sarfaraz Nawaz Shah sir, for their constant encouragement and support, due to which we can able to do such events. I want to extend my thanks to Avni Vasant Madam, HOD Computer Department, for technical support, and respected Gade Dada for wonderful graphic designs. I thank all the faculty members. Without their help, this event would not be possible. Lastly, I want to thank all the participants for showing their interest in the session. I once again thank you everyone for making this program successful. BITS Institute of Physiotherapy would look forward to see you. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you once again, ma'am.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, ma'am.